Okay, and so here we go. This is our, I think, sixth year of the PhD in, often we say technical HCI office hours. So it's an office hour dedicated to those of you who think about doing PhDs and maybe are in the process of applying. And yeah, so today I have with me quite a few friends. So I would say we'll just go around, do introductions. And overall, we'll structure it after the introductions. We'll go through some questions. Some of you have submitted questions. We'll also discuss like maybe some that are on our mind, things you wish to know, kind of questions. And then we'll actually also take questions from those of you who attend live here today. Um, and you can raise your hand at any time, of course, but would be best to hold back with your audio questions until the end. So we have Uwe here. So why don't you start first and say uh, who you are, what you're interested in?
Oh, so hello everyone. I'm Jiang. I'm a new assistant professor at the University of Utah. Yeah, I just joined this month, and I just finished my PhD defense. Yeah, also in this month. Uh,
Woohoo.
yeah, I good. So I moved. Yeah, my background is a little bit complicated. So I moved a lot. I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto in Canada. Then I got my master's degree from University of Maryland, College Park in the US. And then I moved to, oh, then after my undergrad, I actually worked at Intel for 1 year in California. Then after my master's, I moved to Germany. So I worked at Max Planck Institute for 2 years. Then I joined Aalto University for my PhD in Finland. So yeah, traveled a lot.
Yes, and
Uh,
now you're at Utah. All right, cool.
yeah,
And what are
good.
your interests roughly?
Oh, so yeah. So I'm mostly working on UI understanding, UI agent, eye tracking, and I'm also interested in like UI in XR. So yeah, mostly
Okay,
those topics. Yeah.
thanks for joining us, Uwe. So then next we have Jason.
Oh yeah. So hey everyone, I'm Jason Wu. Right now I'm a research scientist at Apple, but I'm going to be joining Purdue as assistant professor in computer science starting January. So that's coming up. Previously I did my PhD at the HCI Institute at Carnegie Mellon. Um, in terms of research interests, I work a lot in computational interaction, which means I like to collect data and try and build models of various HCI phenomena and artifacts as a way of improving them. So during my PhD previously, I built a lot of models also on user interfaces, right, to try and predict like the semantics and content in them, so we can like present it more accessibly to different assistive technologies. More recently, I've been pretty interested in trying to encode like a lot of HCI expertise, I would say, like in design and usability into machine learning models to try and help HCI applications, but also try and improve AI so they could yeah, help HCI researchers in the future.
That's cool. All right, so that's a lot of good stuff. So we have Jazz here. Jazz.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am an incoming assistant professor at MIT EECS/CCL, so that's electrical engineering and computer science. I'll be starting July 2026, technically, so I guess fall in some sense. And then I did my PhD in computer science at the University of Chicago just before and finished recently. I guess my interests are around methods for modifying our senses, kind of like how you might like decrease the volume or increase the volume on your phone. Instead of doing it to your phone, can you do it to your own senses? I've
Hmm.
done this previously with things like smell, taste, temperature, and touch for VR, but also for use cases like health, comfort, or safety is the envisioned directions. And so that's a lot of like wearables, upcoming work on like modeling, perception, input, output kind of just stuff. So if you're interested in those things, that's where I'm going.
That's cool. Thanks for joining us today. I also think we have Jaylin here. Jaylin, hello
Yes.
and good
Hi,
morning.
sorry. Hi, yes, I sorry for joining a few minutes late. It's 7:30 here, so got
Mm.
up a little early. But hi, I'm Jaylin Herskovitz, incoming assistant professor at Tufts CS, starting also January 2026. And yeah, I graduated this summer with my PhD from University of Michigan, computer science. I also did my undergrad there, so I was in Ann Arbor for over 10 years. Um, and what was the other thing? Research interests are
Yeah.
mostly accessibility focused. More recently, I guess, looking at DIY technologies. So how can people create technologies that are personally meaningful to them? So that kind of draws a lot from end user programming tools and creation tools. And I'm kind of interested in how we can support people's natural creativity. Um, so yeah.
Cool. That's nice to see you here, Jaden. And then we have two more guests I wanted to introduce. We have Chang here.
Hey, everyone. So my name is Chan, and I'm currently assistant professor at Boston University. I joined Boston University this September. Prior to that, I was a research scientist at Adobe Research. I've been at Adobe at 4 years. Before that, I got my PhD at Columbia University. So my research interest is general, like twofold. One is on the AR, VR, physical computing and interaction technique side, which we are exploring new interaction modalities and able to enable new interactive applications in AR, VR. Another side, which is more developed after I joined in Adobe, is on the human AI interactions, where we're trying to seeking like interaction modalities beyond text and also leverage human computer interaction principles and able to develop better AI models that align with the humans' needs. Yeah, that's my.
That's cool. So behind you, that's not all light switches, is it? Like it looks like you have a lot of light, and that's actually interesting.
Yeah, that's around. That's my office.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to touch. Okay, anyway, here we go. We also have Ishika here, who is joining us. I think I found you in the list, and hopefully I'm going to make you a co-host too. Yeah.
Yeah, hi everyone. My background is a little different than everybody else here. I'm currently a PhD student, a first year PhD student at CSC in University of Michigan, and I joined this year. I worked at Adobe as a research associate for the last 2 years, and before that I did my undergrad. And I'm mostly interested in problems around human AI interaction, more specifically looking into over-reliance for creative tasks. For a bit more context, I don't necessarily come from a background in human AI interaction. I have done some research on it before, but my prior research has been quite diverse. I have explored um, XR for storytelling, some social computing stuff. So, like, my prior research has been a little diverse. And if that is similar to anybody else in this call who's like planning to apply and thinking of how to put a story together, I would be happy to help you out with my application experience. But yeah, excited.
Yeah, in fact, we just met last week, and then Ishika said, "Hey, I was also going through this, and I'd like to participate and help if I can." And then that's really cool to have you here today. So we're gonna go through some questions. Some of them are made up by me, and others actually have been asked. Some of them are based on a true story, and some of them are true stories. And then I would like maybe some of you, like we don't have to go like everyone take every question, but like those of you who feel like, hey, I have an idea, then maybe chime in. So I got one last night that I thought was very interesting, couldn't get to, but I think it will be a good warm up for us. And also maybe Ishika could turn this question around, thinking more like about the advisor side. So the question was originally, what kind of students do you find most rewarding to advise? Those who come in with a clear agenda or those who are still exploring? And this question is a very good question because it has like this idea of like how detailed does my research statement should it sound very determined, should it sound fixed? So there's a couple of things going into this question. How do you think about this? Let's say so what kind of, I'll repeat it one more time. Would you find most rewarding to advise a student that comes in with a clear agenda or those who are still exploring? And I'm gonna just pick Jason. Thank you, my friend. The hand is up. All right, here you go.
Um, Yeah, so I haven't officially started yet. So but I would say that I think like it's good to be independent and curious at maybe different stages. I mean, it's always important. Both are always important, but maybe like the stage you're in might also affect things. Like if you're coming in, um, maybe like so there's like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, and if you're an undergrad just applying, maybe you've only tried one thing. So if you're like in your statement of purpose, you might write that you're very sure that you're interested in, I don't know, mobile computing, because like in your undergrad, you've only had time to do mobile computing. Um, but yeah, like maybe at that stage, it's really great to be curious. I would want ideally someone who's like very easily interested in different things. But in your statement of purpose, there should still be like some kind of story. Later, of course, in your PhD, you eventually want to be more independent, right? Like you want to have like at the end of your PhD, hopefully you're like the expert in the world in something, right? And that would probably require that you um are more independent and can come up with these research ideas on your own. So yeah, I think initially I would want someone who has done some sort of trajectory of work before, but is also like easily interested in things.
All right, cool. Anybody else? Thanks, Jason.
I'll chime in. I think broadly, I kind of look at a PhD as ideally like a collaboration between an advisor and a student. I mean, that's kind of how I see my own PhD. Like I came in with, ideas and thoughts, and then my advisor on home, obviously had his own ideas, and it was the combination of those two things that, kind of made the PhD in the end. Um, so I definitely agree with Jason. Demonstrating some sort of, natural curiosity about things is amazing. I think in terms of like the particulars of what you put in that statement, I definitely think, some sort of concrete ideas, questions is great, but not for the purpose of like, I have these ideas and this is the exact plan I'm going to follow in my PhD, because that will never work out. But rather, I guess, just for the purpose of like, hey, I am a person who can look at research in a meaningful way and, come up with something that interests me right now, even if that will change later. So I think looking at it from that attitude possibly can help, even though it's not a definite one or the other here.
Okay, so slight twist on the question, and maybe Ishika can also join in, but we can also all think about it. So imagine you're a PhD student seeking an advisor, and some of our more junior advisors often have a very specific research agenda because their head is also kind of like up for tenure and stuff like that. And then the more senior advisors, they're like, oh, whatever I find interesting, I do. I just do research for fun. I have nothing to lose. So, are there pros and cons to picking advisors at these different stages of their careers? Earlier ones helping them build the lab, later ones kind of like leading the lab in their absence. What are things that we should be thinking about? What could be a good, how can we make each of these cases a good PhD experience? Do any of you have ideas about that?
Maybe I can, I mean, I feel like my perspective definitely would be from an applicant side.
Mm-hmm.
And also, so I feel you're very right in saying that, professors have different requirements. And based on that, since the question was also that, how specific versus broad we should be, and like how curious versus, like, oh, I want to do exactly this, we should be in statement of purpose. It's definitely, I think, useful to think about what kind of professors you're applying for that particular university and what their interests are like. Like if they're super specific, it might make sense that you are trying to appeal to that part of your application. But that being said, I feel, yeah, if you're working with somebody who has super specific ideas, you might end up being in situations where the ideas you're working on are not always your own. Like they're sort of like ideas given to you, or then you build upon them. And if you're okay with that in the beginning years of your PhD, that's completely okay. Versus if you want a lot more freedom and you want to just start from scratch and like build upon your idea, as Jaylin said, by collaborating with your professor. So I think that's more of like an advising style situation that you want to think about, like how
Mm-hmm.
much hands-on versus hands-off of an experience you want. And these are things you can discuss with your professor in your interviews or through emails. Like, I think these are good questions to ask when you're talking to them. And based on that, sort of see what style maybe appeals the best to you. But yeah, I think the baseline is just reading a lot on like the professors you're interested in and what are they talking about on their websites or through Twitter and stuff like that. Like, how open do they seem in terms of collaboration?
Cool, cool, cool. All right, yeah, so there were some questions regarding the specificity, so more specifically about the research statement. So I guess you touched a little bit on this. So the concrete question here is it necessary to have a specific research question for the statement of purpose, or should I make it wider, such as interested in making a technology for disabled people, and so like a more general theme rather than a specific research question? What kinds of elements are you looking for as you look at the re statement of research or purpose?
I can probably answer that one.
Hmm.
I've been getting a lot of emails, so I can kind of like speak from experience at this point on that. But I guess both is probably a good place to be. You want to kind of like mark the general area that you're interested in. And I think when you do specific research questions, it's like what Jaylin was saying. You're not like engaging yourself to like only doing those questions.
Hmm.
For someone looking at the application, it's more trying to see if like how you're thinking about this research area. And it could even be like three research questions like, oh, I'm really intrigued by like this research question and this one and this one. And so like these are areas and these are questions that have been intriguing me right now.
Hmm.
Um, it's going to change regardless. I can tell you that's been the case for myself. It's been the case for most people, but I think it's really showing your thought process and then like the general area as much as and less so like I'm promising you that I will be specifically only looking at this question, which might be over over constraining yourself in some sense at that point.
Yeah, the worst case that can happen, even if it's a super duper question, if it just doesn't really directly match with any faculty, the application will just fall between the cracks and you will probably not get admitted. So I think the strategy of overarching interest and maybe current or some specific examples and in general making it sound more like examples rather than I'm going to do this or I'm not going to come, then I think you have a good yeah, achieving good balance there is hard. We have another question related to this, which is how much should we discuss specific research questions versus career trajectory and motivation in the statement of purpose? So that's another thing that people try to balance. Maybe from your own experience or like what would be most interesting to you, how would you advise somebody who's asking this? Anybody?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. To be honest, I think as an incoming assistant professor, maybe we don't even have the full view of what this should be. I think, at least from my current perspective, I don't know if I would devote a ton of space to career trajectory. I mean, when you're, applying it's before your first year, that will definitely 100% change over your PhD. I mean, you
Hmm.
can say if you have, an idea that draws you towards a specific thing, like you really love teaching and working with students, like, that could be good to include because that's going to be part of your next 5, 6 years in the PhD. Um, but I don't think it has to be a huge amount of space dedicated to that. Like
Yeah,
I just think it'll change no matter what. So um
I do
I
think
care more
motivation
about,
is
yeah.
motivation is important. It's something that is often also asked in interviews, more like, what's your motivation to do a PhD? Why do you want to specifically come to this environment? So the motivation part, yeah, I would agree. There is maybe more something to think about in an interview. The trajectory, that's kind of like speculation. I mean, and so I think. what would we actually like to see in a research statement? Let's all chime in. So I think for me, it's important to see a little bit like what type of research experience do you have? Have you been involved already in like an HCI project? Have you done user studies? Have you been building prototyping? Have you been, what kinds of skills do you have? That's like something I like to see, and how much maybe ownership you had over that project. What else? Yuan, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I think maybe you should like explain your prior research experience and the connection between your prior research and your future direction. I think that is important. Like, why do you want to do those like future work, and how is your like previous research? Yeah, how would your previous research benefit your future research? Something like that. I think I want to see this kind of connection and know
Okay.
your motivation about those. Yeah.
Let's crowdsource a statement. Jazz next.
Yeah, I think motivation and skills can be like pretty broad. When I did my PhD application, I didn't have any research experience. So for me, what I tried to do was do art projects to try and like demonstrate prototyping skills. Basically, like anything that can demonstrate that like you're trying to acquire those skills if you can't get them right now is very helpful. And then on the other side, I do want to speak to like sometimes applicants are much older. Like you might stop between your undergrad and like your graduate degree for 10 years. I've heard and I know some friends like that. That's totally fine. And I think in those cases, trajectory can be helpful in the sense that like maybe you were working on something that's like relevant to your actual proposal in terms of career trajectory. That might be a place where it shows your motivation or adds to it. So it depends.
That's a
Like
good point.
motivation
Yeah.
can show up in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. And then Ishika, you had her hand up.
Yeah, so just adding to this discussion, I feel like at least when I was writing my application, what I had in mind was that PhD is a 5-year long commitment. It's not like a 2-year or a 3-year thing. So what I tried was to use my experiences to show that, oh, I actually mean that I want to do a PhD and, I'm serious about this. Okay, maybe my field would change, but like research is important to me, and these are the reasons why you should believe that research is important to me, and
Okay.
which is where I would put together my experiences, or like sort of put together that narrative that this is not just a random idea I had in mind. This is something that I do want to pursue seriously. So maybe if you could make a case that way.
Okay, cool. I think Jason was next and then Chang, but Jason?
Yeah, so this is I think like when reading like some statements, one thing that is, I don't know, it's hard to quantify this or like take this exactly as advice, but an interesting statement also has like a little bit of a story. Like even if they're, if you're someone who like did a little bit of health work and also something completely different, like I don't know, what is something completely different? So, but there's like some kind of way that you could like connect that together, then that becomes really interesting. I would also say that there are a lot like people there's no like formula or template for SOPs. I would say like people write it very differently. One resource that I like to tell people about is this website called like CSSOP, like Notion or something. If you Google that, you can see like a lot of people have like uploaded their statement of purposes. If you go to that website and scroll all the way to the oldest one, you will probably find mine, the ancient example. But yeah, you can see a lot of the variety there. There is like a little bit of a bias there, of course, right? Like because people have, like only a certain type of people would have uploaded their statements. But I think it is useful as like a reference point to see like, hey, how do people write about what they want to do? And there are these different ways of doing it too.
That's cool. Thanks, Jason. Chang?
Yeah, I think Jazz already covered some of this, but I know not everyone has the experience on doing a research project or have the experience to work with some professor, has publications. And sometimes I also value some independent project that you have done. You can write down in your research statement. For example, you have contributed to some open source project, you have developed a game, you have some like out of your own interest, you've developed some prototype. I also value that a lot because I think that show you are able to you are self-motivated and you are doing something that just out of your curiosity and able to build some stuff that's just fit with your own interest. And I think that's something I feel very important. Even if doing PhD, you are able to just you're self-motivated and able to use your own interest to explore some questions. So I would love to see that in the research statement as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's good, Chang. I think the many skills can be learned on during a PhD. You can become a better programmer. You can become a better prototyper. You can become a better at user studies and things like that. But what is very hard to learn is like self-motivation, grit, resistance, dealing with criticism, getting up again after somebody has, after you've fallen over, or aka being rejected, or your paper was rejected, and not taking things personally all the time. And so there's a lot of that during a PhD, and I think over the years I've started, especially in interviews, started to look less at the skills and more like or more like less at the hard skills and more like at the soft skills. And we can talk about interviews in a bit. Just curious whether there was one other thing. I'm not sure how common this is, but let's say it's very common that maybe your interests are not a direct overlap with the people that you target. And so here's one question. How should we approach potential advisors when our proposed research area is adjacent to their current work, but not directly aligned? So, first of all, would you still want to be approached? I would probably say yes, because I think we often like to think about how to expand into interesting new directions. The reasons why we pursue this research rather than maybe that other research that you're interested in is maybe we didn't have the student previously who was interested in that other research, and maybe you're personally actually quite interested in it. So I would say you can't always judge based on what we're publishing and what we're doing, what we're writing about on our websites, or what we say to the media, that this is necessarily the only things that you're interested in. So I would say in general, yeah, just apply and yeah. I think when it comes to this, you're feeling like there was another one that was very interesting. Sometimes, so this one. I did my research in undergraduate and master's for VR and military training. However, I'm still torn if what I'm doing is HCI or persuasive technology. How do we differ between these topics? So for this case, I would encourage you to take a bit of a broader view. I don't think there's like a research area called persuasive, a research discipline called persuasive technology. I think persuasive technology is maybe one of the areas we study in HCI. So I do think you want to ideally demonstrate a little bit of an awareness of how the topics that you're interested in, how they are connected to maybe, if they're not directly the topics that your advisor is interested in, like how they could be connected. And you don't have to be too persuasive. I don't think you have to tell me that I should really work with you on this because, Michael, this is so much better than what you're doing. And more like you're basically sending an invitation. Like I think it's interesting. I find it very interesting if somebody doesn't repeat my papers back to me, which, by the way, has increased thanks to ChatGPT. Most emails actually have become worse these days, and also the number of emails has even increased more. And so I think what what I think people always say is they want to see, and you would probably all agree this is true, some kind of like, first of all, stay true to yourself. Like, tell me what you are interested in. Just don't try to guess what I want to hear and tell me that, but tell me what you're interested in. I can figure that out whether that's interesting to me or not, or how to make it work. But don't guess and don't repeat my papers back to me. I think it's more interesting. For example, if a paper really inspired you, then I'd like to know why and how, rather than you demonstrating that you've read my papers. It's actually really not important to me. Also, I'm not always proud of all of my papers. I have my own favorites too. And so maybe you pick the one that I hate. And so that's kind of like dangerous. Are there other some kind of maybe on this segment of research statement and materials? Are there some things that maybe previously you thought this was a good idea, but then you realized that somebody told you maybe don't do this? Do we have any kinds of like stay away from this advice type of questions? don't do this. I think we talked about the specificity, navigating some of these trade-offs. Is there anything else we should be thinking about? Is it
Um,
important to be named in the statements? Are you looking, are you scanning? Do they say my name?
I'll say one that I got surprised by recently, where
Okay.
it was more an email, but like they kind of like derided someone else that they worked with. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like I think if you're in a tough situation and you reach out, or like your statement essentially frames like lots of blame on like this very specific person or things like that, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know.
That's not a
I
good
think
starting point, I think.
it's not a good
Yeah.
starting point. Yeah. I think it's like you want to watch out for the tone. Like you can reframe those kinds of things more about kind of like what you're doing to like succeed or get out of that situation. It's yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's not the place for that in like a statement of purpose, but I've seen that. I guess that's my heads up.
Maybe if it turns out the first version turns out this way, then maybe give it a little bit more time and then try to write it in a bit more fair, a bit more balanced kind of way. I do think these things happen, so it's not. I mean, it's. I think it's good to be able to talk about this, but like with some maturity, I think, with some growth mindset, and yeah, maybe forward thinking rather than backstabbing. Okay, Ishika.
Yeah, so adding to the like don't do this kind of an advice,
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of times when we're writing our statement of purpose, it just ends up becoming the resume in more words, which
Hmm.
isn't, I mean, sure, you could do that, but it's not really adding much to your application when you could really use that space to tell your story or add something more to your personality. When somebody reads it, they know more about you than they would when they're just reading your resume. So thinking from that story perspective would be important. Like once you're done with the first draft, maybe you can review. Is it just like reiterating what my resume already says, or am I really adding more information to the for the reader?
Yeah. It's a good idea to talk more about maybe how one research idea led to that next research idea. And so more like the meta, the glue between, rather than in this paper I did this, in that paper I did that, because that is essentially what the CV lists. Yeah, that's cool. And then Jason?
Yeah, so I think one sort of thing I would um try and avoid is being like, so I think in papers, if this was a paper rather than a statement, like you try and be very like pretty objective. Like you don't want to say like, oh, I did the best research project in the world, whatever, or like this was the best result in the world, or something like that. In the statement, you can say, I think it's perfectly fine to say like, oh, I'm proud that I, did this and I thought it was really cool. But you also don't want to make it sound like too ridiculous. I think that is something that would be kind of weird to me. And then I think the second part of your question was like, if we look for, our names in the
Yeah, that was an
statements or
idea to
whatever.
challenge you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to do. It like I don't think the statement should be targeting like specifically one person, but maybe I've seen like in the last paragraph or something, you could say like at University of Michigan. I could definitely see how my interests in, personalized XR connects with Michael or something like that. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think it's actually a best practice, to be honest. Like there's this
Yeah.
question, how much do we need to tailor the statements to each of the places? And I would say I would normally say the majority of the statement, the vast majority. I mean, you can make some improvements if you feel like you didn't have enough time for the early versions and but you had to submit it due to deadlines. But like I wouldn't write specific statements for Purdue and then for Boston University and then for Tufts. But I think this part where you try to express alignment, which is usually towards the end where you name drop, that I think is good. And I would probably also pick people that are like closer in research areas. So for us, it's very interesting in School of Information. If you list like five different people and they're like from super weird different areas, it just gives a very weird impression. if you're like listing Anhong, me, Venkatesh, for example, or Jaylin, if you joined here, Jaylin, then I feel like okay, so I can. It helps also label you, but if you then go we have some interesting co-advising situations where some kind of like two different kung fu schools meet and advise the student now. But yeah, China, I would only do this where I'm sure that I'm saying the right thing, and probably also not list like 5 people, but maybe 2 to 3. That would be my advice. All right, so on research area, I feel like we have covered quite a bit. Maybe we'll have more questions later.
Um,
Yeah.
Wait, I just wanted to add to what Jas was saying. I think something about like this person who maybe did not have a good experience with someone. I feel like if something like that has happened with you, that has really influenced your maybe story or your journey, I think a personal statement is also a good place to explore these things. Obviously, maintaining the growth mindset of the way you put it, but yeah, just keep in mind that's also one of these spaces that you can leverage to talk about your personal struggles and how you overcame them and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna actually throw in one more. On this note of fit, question 24, what's the best way to demonstrate program or advisor fit without just listing the professor's research areas? Like for example, rather than saying I'm interested in AR, VR, and then micro enabling, and then accessibility, and then Venkatesh, like, are there some good ideas of how to demonstrate fit? Something that you thought in the past was compelling, Jaylin?
Yeah, I think this also ties back to the question about adjacent research areas,
Mm-hmm.
which can also be really valuable. I mean, if there's an overlap in methods or skills, like that's probably the biggest way to do it, I think, outside of research areas. Like, oh, I've run, uh, this type of study or something that I know
Mm-hmm.
this person utilizes a lot in their work. Like that's a really strong tie. If an advisor doesn't have to necessarily educate on every single aspect of the methods that they're using, that can be great, even if the area is slightly different. So that's maybe one strategy.
Good idea. Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, I think two things. I think the program aspect I just wanted to touch on really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, I think this is generally true. You don't want to aim for a place where it's only the program that you're targeting mostly, because I think the advisor is much more important than the program in a sense. Just to like say like the program fit aspect might not be like the most like crucial thing to be emphasizing. For the advisor fit aspect, that could be the place where you're doing kind of like example research questions. Because I think what I really like personally is like someone who's looked at what I'm intrigued by and tries to synthesize like questions that are challenging it or pulling it in new directions. Because I think people have skills no matter what. If you're able to get that kind of like thought process about someone's research direction, that's kind of exciting and shows like that you're like really thinking about what they're doing.
Okay. I have one concern, and I want to discuss this with you. So, in the era of Gen AI, how sensitive are you to? So, like, how do you think about this? Is it okay? Would you the use of Gen AI, should it be disclosed even in a research statement? Would you turn down a research statement if it seems Gen AI? Have you thought about how we will interact with this in this current admission cycle, where it's very, very likely to see more Gen AI stuff. So, for example, hey, Meta, tell me the next 2 most important research questions based on this PDF and that PDF. Jason, what do you think?
I think I kind of so I think it's a tool, and like it's kind of like how you use it. It's sort of the same thing with paper submissions, right? Like you can use it for copy editing, but if you use it to write the crux of your argument or to act your whole statement, it does become fairly obvious, like that, usually you'll read some text and there's not any real substance here.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like at this point it's still easy to distinguish basically. If in the future somehow it becomes like very good at making an argument somehow, then I think like eventually there's going to be like an interview, right? So there's like different stages to this.
Yeah.
So then maybe that would have more weight. Like you would I would love to talk to someone and then you can kind of see in their eyes like, hey, what are they, excited about? Or you can hear from their voice like, wow, this is really what I'm excited about. So
Yeah.
I think currently I think it's still very detectable and it would probably affect the quality of your statement overall.
So we're saying you use it, but maybe use it in a good way,
Right.
to
Yeah.
maybe brainstorm your own discussion points, maybe help you with language, rather than actual content and brain ideation and brainstorming, something along those lines. It's a bit hard. Chang, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I do see a lot of recent email they're using ChatGPT and apparently what they're doing is I just throw like my entire website and say how can I write out a statement that fit with the professor's interest, and it's very easy to tell because a lot of things they're just like kind of rephrasing what you have on your website and saying okay, this is very interesting, maybe you utilize some principles and some method and improve something. But I personally, I'm not against using any of the Gen AI tool, especially for proofreading purpose. But I think the way they're not spending their own effort, they're not putting their own thoughts in the generative AI, is very easy to tell. You can just see that it's just repeating what you're saying on the website. I think the correct way they're using that is you still want to have your own thoughts process. You want to like adding your own flavor and maybe just using that as a proofreading purpose. But sometimes, because I'm also teaching a class and I tell the students that there's no restriction on using the AI in my class. And the way I tell them that is that you have to be responsible for what you have submitted. If the AI submitted something that is very trivial, I would treat that as you're thinking about something very trivial. It's just treated as your own submission. I think it's okay like using AI to do some brainstorming, but you need to have your own way to judge whether that statement or whether the idea generated by AI is make sense or not, or is that really something novel. So I think the way I treat that is that I want to also evaluate your ability that as an evaluator, whether you can tell which part the AI generated content is good or not, and I was thinking that that's also kind of reflect your own taste on the AI generated content.
All right. Yeah, I agree. Jaylin?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I definitely would caution against using it for brainstorming. I mean, I think, most of us here, if you're working in technical HCI, you've probably thrown your papers or whatever into these AI tools already and say, hey, come up with some like directions for future research based on this. And we already know what kind of stuff it's gonna spit out, and it's not very good, right? I'm not gonna judge a statement based on like, okay, you use an M dash, you're out, because I totally agree with the proofreading. I think it can be a great tool for people, with different disabilities, or maybe you aren't a native English speaker. So I wouldn't begrudge someone for using it for those things. But like if I see the quality of ideas, is low, and in my opinion, the quality of ideas coming from these AI tools is usually low, right? That's how we're going to judge it. I also think, just for your own, skill development, right? Like 90% of a PhD is like having original thoughts and writing them down.
Yeah.
So, I think if you're really strongly drawn to using AI in a statement for something other than proofreading, it might be a good indicator that the PhD is going to be like really, really hard. Um, you know what I mean? Like think of that as the first sort of hurdle, right?
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's do thanks everyone for this. We're gonna do like 8 minutes maybe on interviews. There's one that I thought was interesting. It's like the straight to the best question you could ask during interviews. So a bit of a mind switch now. We are now in the interview stage. During interviews, what kinds of questions from applicants make the strongest impression on you as faculty? And maybe this could be more like examples from the past where something maybe has really inspired you. or thought was original, or it can be a tip. And then we will have 200 students ask this question. So, any ideas?
I
So,
guess just
yeah, Jaden, start. Yeah, cool.
yeah, I was just gonna say, just generally to start off, like I don't think I'm looking for a specific question, but rather like, can we sort of riff together about research? You know, can we have like a natural conversation about a research question, a problem? Can we brainstorm together? Like that's kind of what I would
Yeah.
look for the
How you
most.
feel
I mean,
about the
that's a
meeting? Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna look for, did they ask me like a really, you know,
Brilliant
good
question.
question about the program, but rather did we have a thought-provoking discussion, you know? And that's, I mean, that's really hard. When I was going in for my interviews, I was like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. I'm going to be terrible at brainstorming. So I guess the best tip there is just to try to see it as a natural conversation with another human who's also like probably a nerd internally about all these topics. I don't know if that can help reduce the intimidation or not, but yeah.
Are there any tips specifically on this, Jaden? Things that help that could help you ease into the conversation? I mean, overcome this initial nervousness. Is there
Mm.
anything you can think of?
I mean, I guess I felt like when I did my interviews, I was actually surprised that on the other end, it did not feel as intimidating as I thought it would. So I
Hmm.
guess maybe that's like a good advisor should kind of, you know,
Make you
help ease
comfortable?
into that
Mhm.
discussion and make you comfortable, right? Like, um, you know, you're the person who's interviewing might ask you questions like, oh, what did you think about XYZ? Or I see in your you know, statement you mentioned blah 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 question. And that can sort of get the ball rolling in those discussions.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, on the flip side, the student can also do some of that leading in if it's a little awkward and the interviewer hasn't brought those things up yet. But that's, I mean, I think how most would, you know, start the discussion anyways. So
Yeah. Okay, Jason, thank you, Jaylin. Jason, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I was gonna say that like so first of all, it is good to ask questions because I feel like sometimes it is very like are you ready to see a slideshow, which is great. Slideshows are great, but like if that's the only thing, then you know maybe and then oh so some I always like to ask like if you have any questions for me at the end or something like that. And it is I think it's good to ask questions. But yeah, like I think in general questions that are pre-prepared that are like targeted at something like, hey, how is the environment at so that those are good questions. But also if there's like a question that it's clear that it naturally arose out of our conversation, that's also a good sign because like you know I was asking you about some questions about your work and then you kind of like it's basically a dialogue as Jaylin said. So if there's like a question that is pretty obvious it's not prepared, it's also a good question, and that's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, cool. Ishika?
Yeah, I just very quickly wanted to say two things. One is, yeah, just in case you don't know, I think like PhD interviews are a bit more informal that way. Like they're not usually like job interviews where, or like industry interviews where there are like a set of questions that the interviewer is going to ask you. So, and like you would see that every professor probably has different things on their mind that they want to discuss or like casually get into a conversation with. So that's just information to know what you're walking into. And
Hmm.
secondly, I feel like these interviews are not just for them to evaluate you, but for you also to get a glimpse of like what kind of thinkers they are, what kind of conversations you can have with them, how would they collaborate with you during your PhD. So eventually, maybe when you have an offer or two in hand, those cues are also going to be super helpful in deciding who you want to work with. So yeah, like I would just say the interviews are very much like a vibe check kind of a process, both for the
Yeah, two ways.
professor
Yeah.
and the student. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at least it's important to prepare some questions because it actually shows that you care about this interview and you actually really want to join this group. And many students actually asked me about my advising styles in the end and whether they can do internships during their PhD. I think by asking those questions, you can roughly know the the style of the advisor, and yeah, then you can, like, from the conversation, you can, I think in the end, the end part of the interview is more like a casual conversation. Then maybe you can also see like whether the personality fits or not, or something like that. I think that you can just make it more casual.
Okay. All right. And so on the slideshow point, I think coming with some flexibility, not like that I have to go through the slideshow or otherwise I feel bad. So be prepared to be interrupted, go back and forth, treat it more, some of us may treat it more like a working meeting. Hey, what if we change the order of the slides? How would that feel? But it is a good idea to come with some preparation, but also some like flexibility. Maybe not everybody. We also need to understand that not every place is the same. So in some places, the professors will directly interview you. In some others, there's like a committee that will interview you, and then there's not a direct match initially. It's more like rotation based, or you're like just admitted into the program. So these different universities have different kinds of styles by which they admit students, and but I think in each of these cases you want to come prepared and then maybe with some flexibility. Okay, so I think we've done interviews, research materials, so we're almost admitted now. That's cool. Let's open up to our students here in the last 8 minutes. We can talk about anything that's on your mind. Maybe you can raise your hand and then that can help me call on you if there are. And you can also really ask the questions that maybe you have posted. It's also fine. So we start with Ethan.
So I'm really curious about what room there is in a statement of purpose, aside from like specifically formulated research questions, for a degree of speculation. And the reason that I ask this, and what I mean by speculation, is just like talking through the types of things that I've been thinking about, directions that I think things might be interesting in. And the reason I mention this is because in my process right now, there's a lot of stuff that I'm thinking about, which I was kind of introduced to when I had the privilege to attend MetaConnect and listen to Richard Newcomb and Michael Abrash speak, just in the field of like us being on the cusp of kind of the second and third generation of human computer interaction. And it's hard right now to predict what that third generation is going to look like. But I think in an ideal world, it would be more like multimodal, spatial, and human. So
Okay.
to put that
Yeah,
in
that's
one
cool.
sentence, just what room is there to talk about things that are interesting if it's not yet compiled down to a research question?
Well, so I'll start. I would find it is interesting in the sense that it would probably be a bit non-traditional. If it's genuine, I would put it under this category of motivation. So whether or not this leads to direct important research questions or something, I wouldn't say it has to. It would give me a sense that this is somebody who really cares about this area, is a little bit like is knowledgeable in some of the latest trends, has some experience. I mean, going to MetaConnect or like at least attending it in some capacity is like I think is an experience that's shaping in some way. And so I would say definitely included. I feel like some of the questions, the nature in the document is like, I'm a little different. Can I do this? And then I feel like, yeah, the overall advice is always emphasize, so use it. The non-traditional parts, that's what makes you stand out potentially. I think there is room. At the same time, you still want to really touch on like, okay, I have this initial experience, or I don't have so much experience yet because I wasn't in an environment where, but I am going to MetaConnect, I'm doing all these things. So depending on how much skills and how much experience in terms of research you have, so that it doesn't feel like, you want to make sure it doesn't feel like it can feel like a supplement rather than a replacement, or maybe it's a replacement. But I also think it can also, especially these industry tied things, there's a reason why we do research in academia as opposed to industry, and why we, for example, send our students to industry from time to time. But there's a lot of value in doing research in academia. So you don't want to come across like, I want to do this industrial style type research, because we don't do this. There are actually quite significant differences. And so it would still lead to, I definitely get you to the interview stage, I think. So it would be very nice to see some of that. But I do think the other things we talked about, like the motivation, the research experience, the skills, what you want to learn, how you want to grow, those are things I would like to read about. I will not take the next question, but I will pick Zach, who you had your hand up after Ethan.
Cool. Thank you. So I was just wondering, I have a lot of projects that I'm currently in development on, but there's not like a paper to show off or some sort of deliverable yet. And I'm wondering, as we approach the application deadlines, how to show off these projects that are in development and maybe start a conversation on how they could be continued at the next destination, the lab or whatever.
That's cool. So I said I would not take this question, but I want to say one thing. This is actually a really good stage to be in. Like I think when you have done some research, you have the tendency to be so proud of your paper that all you talk about is your publication and you forget about the research process and what went into it. So when you're in the stage that you are in right now, it could be very interesting to hear about some of the projects you've started and maybe if you have publication plans, so things like that's how I would approach it. I actually think it can be very valuable. It's not necessarily giving you putting you in a disadvantage. Does anybody else from our guest hosts have an answer to Zach?
Just a very quick comment on that. I think I value project a lot, and I think it would be great if you are able to create some like video demos or create a project website that can show off the project, the content of the project. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, we do click these things and we do
Yeah.
we do like these things. All right, so that's cool. Then I hope that's good with you, Zach. Thank you for your question. So I think Bochon was next, or Kenny.
Yeah, thank you. So my question is kind of different from others, but so
That's
when
a
I
good
search
thing.
for thank you. So when I search for where to apply, like probably similar to a lot of people here, I focus a lot on like potential advisors and their labs and how much I could contribute and grow in those environments, and really focus on like the potential synergy between myself and the advisors and the lab. But I also am like more and more wondering about if we kind of need to address how like the particular program or department of that school could help me grow as well. And I'm a bit lost on that because obviously um, it should probably go beyond like I want to work with Professor so and so in this department, but obviously, it's not, it sounds worse to go like, so and so school is like a prestigious top ranked school. So if there are any tips on like how to express if a certain department or program is good for me in like interviews or
I think it
statements.
is a question that comes up in specific environments. If you're just shooting for all the CS departments, I don't think they would ask. But like in the School of Information, they might ask you, which is where I am, for example, they might ask you why the School of Information or why the HCI Institute over the Software Research Institute or like so. I think. On the other hand, I don't know that you have to have the most sophisticated answer to that. I think in the advice for our specific PhD program, they may ask you to engage with why do you want to study the School of Information. I think the key is to speak to interdisciplinary research, which you can actually also have within the CS department, but for some reason that seems to be the main motivation for most of these specific places. At University of Washington, you could apply to HCDE, CSE, or the iSchool, and you probably in most cases want to apply to each of these because, I mean, they cost money, I know, but maybe you want to be at UW or something like that. And then I would craft a slightly different statement in the parts that concern the advisors and in maybe the program, but I think it's maybe 1 to 2 sentences. I don't think so. Just tell us more the story about yourself, and just maybe you want to hint that you want to hint at the fact that this application to this program is intentional. It's not like I'm going to increase my chances. I mean, we also want to increase our chances, but I don't think you have to spend like motivation why you want to study in this specific, like spend a lot of time on that. That's how I would answer. Yo-Yo, you also had your hand up. Thank
Oh,
you,
is it
Kenny.
me, Jojo?
Jojo, yeah, sorry.
Hi, my name's Jojo, and I actually have two questions. The first question is, so I have some paper published in the past, which I don't feel really good on them. I won't say I'm ashamed of it, but I don't think they're really good papers because I was quite young at the time. And I definitely think I can do a little bit better than I was. And what if I'm showing those papers to the professors and I don't want them to think that I'm still on that level? And this is my first question. The second question is, so I was doing research on VR, AR, and health, and I've recently expanded my research interest into also some wearable device or tangible, but I'm not very experienced in. And will that be a disadvantage when professors like Jason or Jess are reviewing my application? Or so will you guys choose someone who are more experienced in tangible or wearable programming?
Okay, cool. So two questions. One was the paper that you've done a little earlier and maybe are not so proud of anymore, and you don't want to be like don't want it to be held against you. The other one, targeting Jason and Jazz, specifically Jason, did you want to pick one of those or maybe even both?
I can briefly talk about both. So the first one is I think professors know, like, first of all, having anything published already is like a signal that you've like you can kind of complete a little bit of an arc of a work. So no one is expecting like like a best paper or whatever, right? So just like having the evidence that you're able to kind of complete a project is already very good. In your statement, you can emphasize more about like the parts you are proud of, right? Like, I mean, like, oh, I was able to, come up with this idea and whatever and present it. So that turned out well. Um, the second question is kind of interesting because earlier I mentioned that repository of online SOPs, and if and I read mine sometimes, or I remember what I wrote, but it's like actually completely different from what I ended up doing. Um, so 'Cause I think I wrote mine on like wearables or sensing or something like that. So I like very different. I think if your question was like how, you know, professors might read SOPs, like how they judge them, I think the topic match is a part of that. But I think another part of it is also like I talked about this earlier, like can you craft a good story, right? Like is there like a trajectory in your work? Like even if it's an adjacent field, but it kind of shows that, hey, your one idea led to another idea, which led to another. It's like kind of this story. So that's a really good sign. And if a lot of the skills overlap with like this adjacent thing, then I could definitely see that being more generally useful. But yeah, so I think just talking about it in terms of like how you talk about it matters a lot too.
Jazz, did you want to add anything since you were mentioned? You were name dropped.
I think Jason covered it quite well. I
Okay,
guess
you want
I'll answer like a bit more on the paper side. I think it depends on what you're not proud of. And I think if it's something like, let's say like it's related to like the future direction that you're excited about and you feel like you didn't successfully do what you were hoping to do, you can frame that as something positive. Every paper has its own limitations, and it oftentimes leads to future work. And so you can kind of be like, I successfully did this, but I felt like to really address my future interests and things like that, I need to acquire these skills to be able to do it fully. And that shows like research maturity to be able to do like kind of self-critique, and also not just being like it's only bad. Like you're going to experience this throughout your PhD, where you're going to like look at a paper maybe 2 years later and be like, please don't read my methodology section, or oh, I could have analyzed this better. Michael even mentioned that like some papers that I've experienced like that people like reach out about, they're not my favorites. Other ones are my favorites. So like this, what you're experiencing and what you're saying is like one, totally normal. And then I think Jason's point of tone is important about this, is like growth tone, not being too down on yourself, aspects like that. And can I just quickly respond to Kenny's question as well?
Yeah, definitely, of course.
I think for Kenny's question about like why a program or even a school, what might be interesting to think about if it's relevant to your research, right? Like, for example, adjacent researchers or things like that. This is something that people do at least for faculty applications, but that could be relevant for PhD. Centers might be interesting. So like if you're interested in like the intersection between, I'm going to give like an example, like Indiana University, like HCI plus like sexuality and gender studies. I think they have the Kinsey Institute, for example, which is like a very unique resource to have. Like sometimes pointing those things out can be useful, but you don't need to spend a lot of time. Like it could show maturity, but I don't know, probably not the most critical part.
Okay, that's good. Ethan, I know you had your hand up, but you had one question already, so I'm gonna pick Alexandra. And then I also looking at the time, so we're probably gonna end in 3, 4 minutes. Alexandra?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask actually, my question is very short and it's about GPA. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that GPA is a good representation of a student's success in a PhD program? And also, like how if I have like a lower GPA compared to general American students, how should I address it in my SOP or maybe CV even?
All right, cool. I've never looked at the GPA in my entire career here, so it never mattered to me. I'm curious what others think.
Yeah, I can also roundly say that I don't think it matters as someone who had a terrible undergraduate GPA. I always like to say it's because I was too busy doing research to care about the classes I was taking.
Hmm.
I think in some places, like the advice that I got when I was applying is that in some places it can be used as a filter, and like sort of the initial pass. I think it is good to mention in your personal statement if there's a strong reason, like extenuating circumstances that influence the GPA during your undergraduate. I think at the end of the day, people are probably looking for, can you pass the classes in the PhD program? That's like the bare minimum I think that people will care about. And if there's some evidence that you can pass, then that's probably all that matters. Like I mean, especially in traditional CS programs where there probably are some, harder, more technical classes you'll have to take as part of the PhD program. Um, that sort of
Yeah,
thing. Anyways, yeah.
that's good. Yeah, I know that some colleagues definitely look at it. I think some people look for specific classes, more like closer to the area rather than like the average, and more like looking at linear algebra, not so good. Jazz, you had a thought?
Yeah, I think GPA is like a good to have in the sense that it's kind of like your skills list, right? Like if you don't have a high GPA, I did not for my undergrad. I didn't have research, so it to me at the time I felt like it was like a double whammy. So at the time, and I think this is probably my advice, is like I tried to find other ways, like anything that I could do to demonstrate that like I had motivation and the ability to get like the skills that were relevant. Um, I think that's like basically the goal is like demonstrating what else do you have that's like proof that you're on the direction to like succeeding in a PhD program. That could be
Mhm.
GPA, that could be projects, that could be volunteering at like another university or weird things like that. Like it can show up in a lot of different forms. If it
Yeah.
was extraordinary circumstances like Jaylin's saying, you should definitely mention that, especially in your personal statement.
I would also, one last thought maybe strategically, I think I would address it once and not like have the entire statement feel like some kind of defensive apologetic thing. So let's say it once, this is what happened, and maybe not even, maybe more in a personal statement than in the research statement, so that you don't that doesn't feel like written out of kind of like with a bad feeling or something. I want this to be framed positively, forward thinking, kind of like maybe try to see that that's the case, and maybe if the initial version feels a bit defensive, then maybe revise it a little bit more. I don't think it matters that much, and as you can see here, some of our participants, they have ended up in really prestigious and cool programs and positions later on, and it's because I guess they made a good impression, and Also, the advisors saw the potential from primarily maybe from the interactions with each of you. So I consider these here my friends, and it was good to see you all coming to our little office hour. I will still reply to some of the questions in the document. I also invite you to help me out if you have thoughts there. And at some point, we'll probably freeze it, but like, let's say for another week or so, I'll interact with you all through the document. Thanks everyone for coming, and have a good rest of your day and week.
All the best, everyone.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you all.
much.
Bye-bye.
See you.